The water is 4 degrees Celsius when her bare feet leave the rocks. She is 78 years old and she is about to hold her breath for 2 minutes. The other women are already in, their white shapes sliding under the surface like seals. And for a moment before she follows them, she looks back at the empty shore. The empty boats, the empty huts where women like her used to gather every morning for 3,000 years. She could be the last one. She knows this. Every woman in the water this morning knows this, and none of them have ever said it aloud, because saying it would make it true. And the Amma do not speak of endings. They speak of tides. Then she pulls the mask over her eyes, and the cold closes over her head, and she is gone. Her name is Misako, and she is an Amma, a woman of the sea. There are fewer than 2,000 of them left in all of Japan. In 1955, there were 17,000. In 1925, there were so many that the coastal villages of the Shima Peninsula employed a town crier, whose only job was to walk the shore at dawn and call the women to the water, and he would shout through a wooden megaphone the names of the dive spots where the abalone were thickest, and the women would rise from their futons and walk barefoot to the beach. And by the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, the ocean was white with their bodies. Nobody shouts anymore. The town crier died in 1963, and his megaphone is in a glass case at the Toba Sea Folk Museum, which is a building on a hill overlooking the bay where the Amma used to dive. And the museum's most popular exhibit is a life-sized mannequin of an Amma in a cotton wrap holding a wooden bucket painted to look like it weighs something. It does not weigh anything. It is made of plastic. The Amma have been diving these waters since before Japan was Japan. The earliest written record appears in an 8th century anthology called the Manyoshu, which is the oldest collection of Japanese poetry in existence. And in it, there is a poem about a woman who dives for pearls in the cold sea off the coast of Shima. And the poem is not about the pearls. It is about the way her husband waits on the shore and cannot stop himself from counting the seconds she is gone. By the Heian period, the Amma were supplying abalone to the imperial court in Kyoto, and the court nobles wrote about them in their diaries with a mixture of fascination and pity, as though the women were a species of sea creature that had learned to speak. The nobles called them Umi no Onna, women of the sea, and they meant it as a compliment, which it was not. In the 12th century, the Amma were granted the exclusive right to supply seafood to the Ise Grand Shrine, which is the most sacred Shinto shrine in Japan and sits 13 kilometers from Misako's village. And for 600 years, every abalone and turban shell and sea urchin offered to the sun goddess Amaterasu came from the hands of a woman who had pulled it from the ocean floor with her own fingers. The emperors ate what the Amma caught. The sun goddess received what the Amma offered. And yet nobody in Kyoto or Ise thought to ask what the Amma thought about any of it. Because asking a woman who dives for a living what she thinks about her life is a modern impulse. And the Amma did not need anyone to ask. They already knew, here is what Misako's body does when she dives. And this is not metaphor. This is physiology observed and measured by researchers from the University of Tokyo's School of Medicine in a 2018 study that tracked 37 active AMA between the ages of 52 and 81. Her heart rate drops to 30 beats per minute within 8 seconds of submersion. Blood vessels in her extremities constrict so aggressively that her fingers and toes register on thermal imaging as ambient water temperature, while her core stays at 36 degrees. Her spleen, an organ most people forget they have, contracts and releases a reservoir of oxygen-rich red blood cells into her bloodstream, a reflex that human beings share with seals and dolphins, and that modern freedivers spend years training to trigger voluntarily. The AMA do it without thinking. They have done it so long that their bodies have rewritten themselves. The University of Tokyo study was not the first. In 1965, a team of physiologists from Nagoya University spent 8 months in Osatsu, attaching electrodes to the chests of 32 AMA and measuring their heart rates during actual dives, not simulated ones, which meant running waterproof cables from a boat into the water and hoping the connectors held. They found that the AMA's average heart rate during a dive was 42 beats per minute, which at the time was considered impossible for a conscious human. They also found that the Amma spent an average of 48 seconds underwater per dive and surfaced for an average of 31 seconds between dives. And they repeated this cycle 60 to 80 times per session, which meant that over a 4-hour morning, an Amma spent roughly 120 minutes underwater and 60 minutes breathing. The researchers calculated that this ratio, 2 minutes under for every 1 minute above, was nearly identical to the diving pattern of the Weddell seal. They wrote a paper titled Physiological Adaptations of the Japanese Amma Diver, and it was published in the journal Science. And in the acknowledgments, they thanked the women of Osatsu for their patience with the electrodes, which the women had tolerated because the researchers paid them for their time and because Masako's aunt, who was the head of the Amagoya that year, had decided that cooperating with scientists was preferable to being ignored by them. The researchers also found something they cannot explain, and subsequent studies in 1982, 1997, and 2018 have confirmed it without understanding it. The AMA's peripheral arteries, the ones that should harden with age, that should narrow and stiffen and raise blood pressure the way they do in every other population of elderly women on Earth, have remained elastic. A 78-year-old Amma has the arterial flexibility of a 30-year-old marathon runner. When the 2018 paper was published, the lead author wrote that he had never seen anything like it. He called it a biological anomaly. The Amma call it Tuesday. But here is what the cameras never show you about the Amma divers, and this is the thing that separates curiosity from understanding. They are not athletes. They are not performers. They are not a dying tradition clinging to relevance. They are the primary breadwinners in their households, and they have been for centuries. The men fish from boats with nets and engines and sonar, and they catch what the market demands. The women dive with their hands and a small net bag and catch abalone, turban shell, sea urchin, kelp, and octopus. The abalone alone sells for 9,000 yen per kilogram at the Toba morning market, which Masako's grandmother helped establish in 1948 on a patch of reclaimed land that had been a bomb crater from a B-29 raid in 1945. The grandmother, whose name was Hana, and who dove until she was 82, negotiated the market's lease with the city government while the men of the village were still repatriating from the war. And when the city clerk told her that a woman could not sign a commercial lease, she signed it anyway with her husband's name and her own hand, and nobody discovered the discrepancy until 1972, by which time the market was generating more revenue than any other single business in the city of Toba. The men bring back what the ocean gives them, the women bring back what they choose, and they have always chosen more wisely. This is not incidental. This is the structure. In the coastal villages of the Shima Peninsula, the Amma have historically earned more than their husbands, controlled their own finances, and made family decisions collectively in the amagoya, the dive hut, which is a wooden shack with a fire pit in the center where the women undress, warm themselves between dives, and conduct what can only be described as a parallel government. The men are not allowed inside. They have never been allowed inside. In 1978, a journalist from the Asahi Shimbun attempted to enter the amagoya in Osatsu to interview the women. He was met at the door by Masako's mother, who was holding a wooden ladle, and who told him, in language that the journalist later described as polite and entirely unambiguous, that if he took one more step forward, she would use the ladle in a way that would make it difficult for him to sit down for the rest of his career. He did not take the step. The article ran without quotes from inside the hut, and the editor's note at the bottom read simply, "The Amma declined to be interviewed on their premises." When Japanese anthropologists began documenting the Amma in the 1920s, they found that the women of these villages had, without formal law or decree, established a matriarchal economic system that predated every feminist movement on the planet by roughly 2,000 years. The men went to sea. The women owned the shore. When the anthropologists asked the men of the village how they felt about this arrangement, the men said they had not been asked to feel anything about it, because it had been the arrangement since before anyone could remember, and questioning it would be like questioning the tide. When the anthropologists asked the women asked the anthropologists why they kept talking to the men instead of the women who actually ran things. The anthropologists revised their methodology. Misako surfaces with an abalone in her left hand and a turban shell in her right, and she does not look tired. Her face breaks the water with the same expression she had when she went under, which is to say she looks like a woman who has been doing something so long that the doing of it is no longer separate from who she is. She swims to the rocks, drops the shells in her floating basket, and turns back to the water without speaking. There are 3 hours of diving left before the market opens. She has been diving this same patch of reef since 1962, the year she turned 14, and her mother decided she was old enough to follow, and she remembers the rocks the way you remember the rooms of a house you were born in. The reef has changed in those 62 years. The coral has retreated. The water has warmed by 1.3 degrees Celsius. Certain species of kelp that used to grow thick on the shallows have vanished entirely. Misako is the only person in Osatsu who remembers what the reef looked like before the changes, because she is the only one who has been watching it for 6 decades. When she talks about the reef, she uses the same tone that other grandmothers use when they talk about a child who grew up and moved away. The youngest Amma in Misako's group is 48 years old. Her name is Chie, and she started diving at 36, which the older women consider absurdly late, like learning to walk at 9. Chi did not grow up in Osatsu. She grew up in Nagoya, which is 2 hours inland by train, and she had never seen the ocean until she was 12. And the first time she saw an Amma dive was on a school trip when she was 16, and she remembers exactly what she felt, which was that the woman in the water was not swimming. She was belonging. Chi spent the next 20 years working as an administrative assistant at a law firm in Nagoya, processing documents and scheduling appointments, and staring at a computer screen in a gray cubicle in a gray building on a gray street. And every summer, she took the train to Osatsu and watched the Amma dive. And every autumn, she went back to the law firm and told herself that next year she would stay. In 2012, when she was 36, she stayed. Her mother called it a midlife crisis. Her father called it a phase. Her colleagues at the law firm threw her a going-away party and gave her a gift certificate to a department store, which she used to buy a wetsuit. The transition was not elegant. Chie spent her first year vomiting seawater, missing dives, surfacing too fast, and getting mild hypothermia 3 times because her body had not learned to shunt blood away from her skin. The older women watched her struggle with a combination of sympathy and something that was not quite sympathy, because the Amma do not coddle newcomers. They watch, they wait. If you survive the first winter, they start teaching you the reef. Chie survived the first winter and the second, and by the third, she could hold her breath for 90 seconds and identify individual rocks at 15 meters by the shape of their shadows. Misako took a particular interest in her, though she would never say so directly. What she said was, "You are still too slow on the descent. You kick from the hip, not the knee," which in the language of the Amma means, "I am investing in you because I believe you will stay." Chie's daughter is 22 and lives in Osaka, where she works for a technology company that makes smartphone applications for restaurant reservations. She has never been in the water with her mother. When Chi was asked by a documentary crew in 2019 whether she wanted her daughter to become an AMA, she laughed and said her daughter doesn't even like the beach. The documentary crew laughed too. Nobody asked the follow-up question, which is what happens to a village when the women who own the shore stop having daughters who dive. Here is what happens. The amagoya closes. The morning market loses its primary suppliers. The men's fishing boats, which have always operated in an unspoken partnership with the women's dives, the men harvesting what the women don't touch and the women harvesting what the men can't find, are now the only game in town. The abalone population, which the Amma have managed sustainably for 3,000 years by diving selectively, by never taking juveniles, by rotating patches of reef the way farmers rotate fields, is suddenly open to commercial trawling. Within 5 years, the abalone collapse. The sea urchin follow. The turban shells vanish from the shallow water and then from the deep water. The morning market in Toba, which once sold 200 kilograms of Amma-caught seafood every day, now sells farmed fish from tanks in Osaka. The Amagoya becomes a museum with a sign outside that explains, in 3 languages, what used to happen here. Tourists take photographs of the fire pit. Nobody lights a fire. This has already happened in 17 villages on the Shima Peninsula. It is happening right now in Misako's village, which is called Osatsu's, and which was once the largest AMA community in Japan. In 2020, Osatsu had 46 active divers. In 2015, it had 62. In 2000, it had 114. Today, the number is 19, and of those 19, 11 are over the age of 70, and the youngest is 48, and the average age is 67.4, and there is no one in training. Misako's own granddaughter, who is named Yuki and is 25 and lives in Tokyo and works for a company that manufactures packaging for luxury cosmetics, visited Osatsu last year for 3 days. And on the second day, Misako took her to the shore and showed her how to hold her breath and how to kick from the hip. And Yuki tried once, surfaced after 11 seconds, and said it was too cold. She took a photograph of her grandmother in the water and posted it on Instagram with the caption, "My grandma is tougher than yours." It received 412 likes. Misako does not know what Instagram is. 2 other divers died since 2020. Their names were Kimiko and Sachi, and they were 79 and 83. And Kimiko dove until 3 weeks before she died, and her last dive was to 18 meters. And she surfaced with a hand-sized abalone and a headache that turned out to be a brain aneurysm. And her daughter said later that if she could have chosen, she would have chosen to die in the water. Sachi retired 5 years before she died because her knees had deteriorated to the point where she could not walk on land for more than 100 meters, though she could still kick powerfully underwater because the buoyancy took the weight off her joints. And in the last year of her life, she would sit on the rocks every morning and watch the other women dive, and she would call out to them when they surfaced. Not advice, just their names, just to let them know she was still there, still watching, still part of the morning even though her body had been taken from the water before the water was taken from her. The rest of the divers who left did not die. They retired because their bodies could no longer handle the cold, or their husbands asked them to stop, or their children moved them to apartments in Nagoya and Osaka with heated floors and heated toilets and heated everything. And they went, because what else could they do? And now they sit in those apartments and watch the weather reports for the Shima Peninsula and calculate the water temperature in their heads and wonder if Misako is in the water right now and if the abalone are running. They call each other on the phone, the old divers, and they talk about nothing in particular, and they never say that they miss it, because saying that would mean admitting that the most alive they ever felt was underwater, in the cold, in the silence, holding their breath, and that they will never feel that alive again. The singing is the first thing that disappears. The Amma do not sing while they dive. They sing between dives, in the amagoya, around the fire. The old songs that their grandmothers sang, and their grandmothers' grandmothers sang, and their grandmothers' grandmothers' grandmothers sang. Songs about the sea, and the fish, and the men who never come back, and the women who wait on the shore, and the babies who are born between tides. And the songs are not sad, exactly. They are factual. They describe what happens when you live your whole life at the edge of something that could kill you and doesn't. When the number of divers in a village drops below about 20, the singing stops, because there are not enough voices to hold the harmony. Then the amagoya closes. Then the market loses its suppliers. Then the reef goes unmanaged. Then the women themselves disappear, one by one, until what remains is the ocean and nobody in it. And the ocean does not notice, and the ocean does not care. And the ocean would fill with abalone again if the trawlers stopped. But the trawlers will not stop, because the trawlers answer to nobody but the price of abalone at the Tokyo fish market. And the Ami never learned how to lobby a government. There are people trying to save them. The Japanese government declared the Amma an intangible cultural property in 2017, which is a designation that sounds meaningful and costs the government nothing. The prefecture built a visitor center in Toba where tourists can watch a 20-minute film about the Amma and then eat Amma-caught seafood at a restaurant next door. And the seafood is real, and the restaurant is profitable, and the women who still dive get a percentage of the revenue, which helps. And the women who still dive also feel like they are performing a version of their lives for people who will fly home and forget them, which does not help. Misako has never been to the visitors center. She says she does not need to watch a film about her own life when she is still living it. A younger generation of Japanese women has, in the last 5 years, begun showing up in Osatsu during the summer months, not to become full-time AMA, but to train in freediving with the older women, to learn the breath hold techniques that no modern freediving school can teach, because they are not techniques. Exactly. They are adaptations that took 3,000 years to evolve. These younger women are mostly in their 20s and 30s, and they come from Tokyo and Kyoto and Sapporo, and they pay for lessons and buy wetsuits at the dive shop and post photographs of themselves holding abalone on Instagram, and the older women accept their money and their enthusiasm with a grace that is not quite trust. They have seen waves of interest before. In the 1970s, when Japan was in its economic miracle, dozens of young women came to Osatsu wanting to learn. None of them stayed past the first winter. In the 1990s, when the bubble burst and everyone was searching for meaning, another wave came. One stayed. Her name was Emiko, and she dove for 11 years. And then she married a man from Nagoya and moved inland and now works at a bank and sends Misako a New Year's card every January with a photograph of her children and a note that says, "I think about the water every day." Misako does not talk about any of this when she surfaces. She talks about the water temperature, which was warmer than expected, and the abalone, which were plentiful today. And she makes a joke about her knees, which hurt on land but not underwater, and she says maybe she should just stay down there. The other women laugh. They are sitting around the amagoya fire now, the morning's catch, sorted into white styrofoam boxes labeled with each woman's name in black marker. The steam from their wetsuits rising into the wooden rafters, and the fire pops, and someone pours green tea from a thermos that has been in this hut since the 1980s, and nobody remembers who brought it. Outside, the fishing boats are coming in. The men will unload their catch and check the market prices on their phones. Inside, the women drink their tea and talk about their children and their grandchildren and the price of abalone, and whether next Tuesday will be calm enough for the deep reef, the one at 32 meters, where the biggest shells are, and where Misako found a pearl in 1997 that she sold for enough money to send her son to university in Tokyo. The pearl was 10 millimeters across, perfectly round, pale pink with an overtone of silver, and it had been growing inside an abalone that Misako had been watching for 3 years. She knew the abalone was there. She had not taken it because it was too young, and then it was not too young, but it was too small, and then it was neither too young nor too small, but she had grown fond of it. in the way that a woman who has been diving the same reef for 35 years grows fond of specific animals who live in specific cracks, in specific rocks, and who she visits every morning like neighbors. When she finally pried the abalone from the rock and opened it on the shore and found the pearl inside, she did not scream or cry or show anyone for 30 minutes. She sat on the rocks in her wetsuit with the pearl in her palm and looked at it. And what she felt was not excitement or relief or the sudden calculation of wealth. It was the quiet sorrow of having taken something that had been growing for 3 years in a living animal that she had said hello to every morning and that she would never say hello to again. Then she stood up, walked to the amagoya, and showed the pearl to her mother, who was still diving at the time, and who held it up to the firelight and said, "Well, he was ready." She meant the abalone. She called him he because the Amma name everything they harvest. They name the rocks, the reefs, the abalone, the sea urchins. They name the storms and the currents and the patches of kelp that come back every spring. They name the whole invisible world beneath them because they are the only ones who can see it. And naming something is how you make it yours. And naming something is also how you say goodbye. Her son is 47 now and works in insurance. He calls her every Sunday. He has never asked her to stop diving because he knows that the question has no answer she would accept. He visited Osatsu last spring with his wife and his 2 children, Misako's grandchildren, and they sat around the amagoya fire and ate grilled abalone that Misako had caught that morning, and the grandchildren, who are 8 and 11, asked their grandmother if they could learn to dive. And Misako looked at them for a long moment and then looked at her son and said, "They can learn, but they have to stay through the winter." Her son did not say anything. The grandchildren ate their abalone, and the next morning they flew back to Tokyo, and the morning after that, Misako was back in the water, alone for the first hour, before the others arrived, before the sun cleared the ridge, before the town crier who no longer exists would have called her name. The fire burns down to embers around 11 in the morning. The women have been awake since 4. They have spent 5 hours in water cold enough to kill most people, and they have collectively brought back 87 kilograms of seafood that will be sold by noon. Misako is the last to leave. She stays behind to bank the fire, which is her self-appointed job and has been for 38 years, and she does it with the same unhurried precision she brings to everything. She arranges the embers in a pattern that her grandmother taught her, a star shape with 7 points, which is the pattern that keeps the embers alive longest without active tending, and which her grandmother said was the same pattern the Amma used in the 17th century, when the women would leave the amagoya before dawn and not return until dusk, and they needed the fire to still be alive when they came back. Misako does not know if the fire ever actually lasted that long. She only knows that her grandmother taught her the 7-pointed star, and her grandmother's grandmother taught hers, and nobody alive remembers who first drew it in the ash, and that is the point. When she stands up and walks to the door, the amagoya is warm and dim and smells of tea and salt and the particular scent of wetsuits drying in the heat of a fire that has been burning in this hut for longer than anyone can measure. She steps outside, and the sun is high, and the market is already calling out prices, and the sea is flat and silver, and for now, still full of abalone. Tomorrow she will wake again at 4. Tomorrow she will walk barefoot to the shore. Tomorrow she will pull the mask over her eyes, and the cold will close over her head, and her heart rate will drop to 30 beats per minute, and her spleen will contract, and her arteries will do what aging arteries are not supposed to do, and she will find the rocks she has been visiting for 62 years, and the abalone she has not yet harvested, and the cracks in the reef where the octopus hide, and she will not think about the 17 empty amagoya huts on the Shima Peninsula, or the daughters who left, or the grandchildren who visited once and flew back to Tokyo, or the museum with the plastic mannequin, because thinking about any of that while you are 30 meters underwater is dangerous, and Misako is not dangerous. She is careful. She is precise. She is 78 years old and the water is 4 degrees Celsius. And she has been doing this since before the American astronauts landed on the moon, and her body knows things that science can only observe and never explain. And when her son asked her last Sunday, the way he asks every Sunday how much longer she plans to do this, she said the same thing she has said for 20 years, which is that she will stop when the ocean stops calling her name. And the ocean has not stopped yet, and she does not expect it to. And somewhere in the deep reef at 32 meters in abalone, she's been watching for 4 years, is slowly, invisibly, patiently making a pearl.